We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
Nosotros crecemos cuando damos.
We grow when we give.
Давайте, и дастся вам.
与えるとき成長する.
We grow when we give.
Welcome to R.O.G, Return on Generosity. I'm your host, Shannon Cassidy. This podcast celebrates generosity at work, not financial giving valuable time, mutual respect, alternative perspectives, and genuine collaboration. Our special guest today is Dr. Natalie Nixon, a creativity strategist and president of Figure 8 Thinking, LLC. She helps organizations accelerate innovation and growth by developing meaningful strategy through design thinking and ethnographic research. She is a published author and a global speaker. Dr. Nixon, Natalie, has accessible expertise on creativity, the future of work, and innovation. She advises leaders on transformation by applying wonder and rigor to amplify growth and business value. Natalie has been featured in Forbes and Inc. and is the author of the award-winning The Creativity Leap: Unleash Curiosity, Improvisation, and Intuition at Work. What I appreciate most about you, Natalie, is the way you enable us to rethink how we think. Welcome to R.O.G.
Thank you, Shannon. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Great to be with you and reconnect, and also to catch up on this amazing topic and all these things that you've taught us. But why don't we start with a little bit of your background?
Sure. My background is quite diverse. I studied cultural anthropology, which I actually use every single day in my work because anthropology taught me to practice deep observation and ask questions from what we could say the worm's eye view of society versus the bird's eye view of society. I think like economics, political science, sociology give us more of that 30,000 foot level view of what's happening. And just by nature of the way anthropologists work, they're on the ground. They do a lot of interviewing, contextual inquiry, observational work. It's what I call the worm's eye view of society. So that's been super valuable in how I approach my work. I also have a background in the fashion industry. My work in fashion was as an entrepreneurial hat designer, and then I worked in global sourcing for a division of the limited brands. And I worked abroad in Sri Lanka and Portugal, making bras and panties for the Victoria's Secret account. And got an opportunity to travel a lot throughout Asia, learned a ton, mainly that, people who've never worked in fashion think it's either really glamorous or they think it's frivolous. And it's neither glamorous nor frivolous. It is a business. And working on the sourcing side really exposed me to the role of technology and logistics and supply chain management, as well as interfacing with the buyer teams and the design teams, and really developing a deep appreciation for how the fashion industry understands that people are motivated by beauty and desire and aesthetics, because no one needs another t-shirt or another pair of jeans in the United States of America, yet it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So there's a lot that other industries could learn from the fashion industry because of that. And then there was a chapter of my career where I was a professor. So I was a professor for 16 years. And the first 10 years I taught the business of fashion. And then I developed and was founding director of the Strategic Design MBA program at Thomas Jefferson University. And that the goal of that program was really to merge the best of business school with the best of design school. So we integrated design thinking and how people learn strategy and leadership and branding and finance. I ended up giving a TEDx Philadelphia talk in 2014, which really catapulted me into being invited into companies to help them design more improvisational ways of working. Because my TED Talk was really about how the future of work is jazz, and here's why and how. And I started getting so many invitations after giving that TEDx talk into companies that I created Figure 8 Thinking totally as a side hustle to my career as an associate professor. And then I looked up a year later and realized I was having more fun with my side hustle, ended up retiring from academia in 2017 and have not looked back and have been steadily building Figure 8 Thinking, which I absolutely love.
Oh my gosh. And I have the pleasure of having been in one of your classes like eons ago.
Oh,
And holding up
yeah.
this black Sharpie with figure 8 thinking on it. It was magnificent. It was soon after you started that business. So we've known each other a long time.
Yes.
And it's just, you have a really accessible way. I like how it was stated earlier of teaching us things that are complicated, but you make it so like tangible. Like, we can do this. You are very encouraging. And it's almost like, as a participant in your workshop, I didn't even realize that you were taking us on this journey. But when we got to the end, it was like, oh, wow, look where we've come. And I think that's your TED Talk is like that, interacting with you personally is like that, where you really take people on a journey with you. It's a very generous thing.
Well, that's high praise coming from you, Shannon. And I like to quote you on my website. That I really love how you capture it, because that really is my goal. And I have to credit all the years I spent as a teacher. I think to my core, I still am a teacher. I just do it in different ways. I didn't even mention this, but in my 20s, I was a middle school English teacher. And that probably was the best preparation for everything I've gone on to do, because middle schoolers are a tough crowd, and you have to have an incredible sense of humor about yourself. To be a teacher, a really good teacher, you have to love learning, because you have to be able to explain why 1 + 1 = 2 in 5 different ways, because all of us get that, in 5 different ways. So thank you for saying that, because the mission of my work is to change lives with ideas, and to get the feedback that you feel like I take you on a journey, and that by the end you're making sense of it in a really practical, applied way for your own work is awesome. That's more than I could ask for.
Oh, for sure. And when we talked about ethnographic research, and then you talked about being an anthropologist, just for those who are not familiar with that term or what that is, I mean, you touched on it a little when you were speaking about your background, but would you mind just sharing a little bit about that?
Sure. So anthropologists don't rely on quantitative survey statistical data to come to build theoretical constructs and to conduct research. One of the reasons that is because as quiet as it's kept, statistical data is really self-reporting data, right? So if you receive a survey asking you to please fill out this survey about how often during the week you exercise. If I fill out that survey, I might say, oh, I exercise 4 days a week, right? 4 to 5 days a week. And there's often a gap analysis between what we say and what we do. Now, ideally, the best kind of research is when there's quantitative and qualitative. It's not, to me, an either-or argument. It's really to have much more integrative approaches. So what ethnographers and qualitative researchers, anthropologists do is that they like to gather stories, observational data, because they might learn through observing my behavior over a month's time that she's only getting to the gym like twice a week. But why is that, right? It may be because of transportation issues, and maybe because of childcare issues, and maybe because I just don't feel like it. Maybe it's an organizational dilemma that I have, right? But it helps you to peel back all the whys, so you really get to understand what's the root of the issue here. So the work of anthropologists is pretty. It's become much more germane to the work in innovation, because so much of innovation work does value the role of qualitative research, being on the ground, getting out of the building, observing what people are doing, not just what they're saying, not just what they're telling you, and then corroborating, and always, then developing insights from that. One of the things that can get a little tiresome, I would say, to be quite honest with part of the work of anthropology, cultural anthropology, because anthropology is vast. Anthropology includes archaeology and linguistics and paleontology. So cultural anthropology is just one stem of it. But, anthropologists are trained to have a lot of self-inquiry. So why do I think the way that I think? How can I be sure that what I've observed is really true? Which is an honest path forward. And there has to be a point where we can, triangulate and move on, right? So, but it's been valuable training.
Yeah. Oh, such valuable training. And I like that the worm's eye view because it's a different perspective of the same thing, which is another thing
Yes.
that you teach is like, what's another way you could look at this? Sometimes we have to scale out, sometimes we have to scale in, right? So just depending on maybe even our natural propensity or the situation that we're looking at, what would be another way for us to consider what's true or what's possible? So it's just
Exactly.
so good. And then you talked about how you want to change lives with ideas, and that is through creativity, through innovation, through wonder, which I know we're going to talk about. But on your website, you have this creativity quotient mindset. And for our listeners, it's if you think about a bunch of circles, well, maybe you could better describe it. Just would love to explain this diagram. I mean, of course, I'm intrigued by it because it starts with this gratitude, grounded in gratitude, something I deeply believe in. So yeah, would you mind just sharing this visual with our listeners?
Yes. Well, anyone who knows me, has worked with me, knows that I love frameworks. I love dreaming up new types of frameworks because I think frameworks are distilled visual representations of complex ideas. They help us to get to the core in a distillation process, a simplification in order to understand sometimes really big ideas. And I think the smartest people are able to explain and describe things in very simple ways. Like if you can explain it to your grandmom or to a 5-year-old, you probably really understand it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking a lot about how we talk about IQ, a measurement of intelligence. We have increasingly since the 80s been talking about and understanding that people have an EQ, they have an emotional intelligence, and we have increasingly valued the role of emotional intelligence in leadership and the way people work together and teaming. And as I was building my body of work as a creativity strategist, I realized we also need a quotient of creativity, and I call that CQ. And a quotient of creativity is important if we actually want to consistently and sustainably innovate. So so then that forced me to start to really wonder and think about and dream about and ponder, well, what's at the root of creativity? And what I got to, so what people see if they go to figureeightthinking.com and there's a resources tab, there's a lot of downloads they can access on the CQ model. It starts, as you said, the heart of creativity actually starts with gratitude. And it starts with gratitude because from my perspective, gratitude is actually the beginning of being a systems designer. What I mean by that is let's take this humble pen, right? If I just take a really simple object like a pen that I might take for granted every single day, my gratitude meditation, daydream, thought about this pen may include, there was someone who had to actually design this shape, an industrial design. There were chemists who had to design and develop the ink and test it. There were supply chain logistical people who figured out how to get this pen, a whole carton of pens from a factory onto a ship into distribution centers. I'm grateful that I have the money and the resources to be able to buy the pen. I'm grateful that I am literate and even know how to write and read in order to use the pen, right? So just the simple act of really starting to unpack gratitude around a simple object really makes you understand your interconnection with all of these other people, all these other systems around the world that you don't typically even think about, right? So systems thinking is an ability to understand the interconnectedness between experiences, services, actions, reactions, and the cascading effects of those. So after gratitude, after we understand our interconnectedness between us and all these other actors in the world and processes in the world, then comes humility because you realize, wow, this is not something so small to take for granted. So there's gratitude, then there's humility. And from my perspective, after we have humility, that actually builds our capacity to be a lot more curious. One of the reasons I have observed that we don't ask more questions in our work environments, certainly when I was a professor, there was always that moment in a class. We've all been there, either as a student or if you were leading a session. Yes, so are there any questions? And there's crickets. And that, as a teacher, as a professor, that's the worst. Because like, wait a second, do they not understand? Are they just terrified to raise their hand? Are they bored? Like, what's going on? Like, you don't. Questions are a way to gauge people's comprehension, to gauge their involvement in the matter, right? So first comes gratitude, then humility. We have the humility, then we're able to not be afraid to raise our hand, to ask the questions. Curiosity then is the precursor to empathy. So many leaders have talked about how important empathy is, and it is, but you really can't empathize with a soul unless you're curious about them. Why do they do it that way, not my way? Why do they sit over here and not over here, right? So curiosity then leads to empathy, and empathy can ultimately lead to action, to equitable action, to action that really moves the ball forward, so to speak, that moves the company forward, that can move an initiative forward. So, but it all starts with gratitude. So that, and that is the way we can build our creative quotient. It's a way that we can step outside of ourselves and learn so much more about others that will inform the work that we've been staring at for months and need to figure out a new way to approach it.
Oh my gosh, brilliant. Thank you. And like you said, what a simplified way of saying something that's very complicated and super accessible. And the links that I'm hearing between these layers or these spheres are questions. I was hearing you ask a lot of questions, and I know you're a huge fan of questions, as am I. Let's talk about questions and why they're so important and how do you categorize them and all that good stuff.
Well, I've learned a lot from my colleague and friend, Warren Berger. He's written some great books about curiosity. I highly recommend them. A book called A More Beautiful Question. And he also had a follow-up book from that called The Book of Beautiful Questions. And Warren Berger is fond of saying that asking questions is a way of thinking. And I love that because it helps to build that bravery to ask a question. It's sometimes I think people are reticent about asking questions because they'll feel like that only reveals my ignorance. Well, yeah, it shows that you don't know XYZ about a particular topic, but A, get over yourself. B, you're not supposed to know every single thing. And C, don't you want to be a lifetime learner? Don't you want to prompt and promote learning and it leads to connection between colleagues who can teach you a thing or two. So asking questions is a way of thinking. That's kind of like just to start there. Mm-hmm. And then it's really important to understand the typology of questions, the diversity and range of types of questions. So I think of it as a taxonomy of questions. And there's basically two categories of questions. There are divergent questions, those big, blue sky, expansive questions like why, or what if, or I wonder, right? Then there are convergent questions that help us to get really tactical. And convergent questions are questions such as what, who, when, where. And then there's also this fun category of hybrid questions. How is a hybrid question? So how can be very tactical. How are we going to do this? How are we going to get this done? But how can be very expansive too, because we can ask, how might we do X, Y, Z, right? Here's the challenge. Mm-hmm. And so many of our work environments, we only ask convergent questions. We only focus on who, what, when, where, how, right? And we don't dedicate time and space for the big blue sky divergent questions of asking what if. When we ask questions like what if and how might I, and I wonder, I don't know about you, Shannon, but it literally changes how I feel physically. I feel hopeful. I feel a little lighter. I feel a bit more expansive. It's permission to dream. And we have these mythologies that real work, the important stuff, is only solutions based. However, the best critical thinkers and innovators that we've come across, everyone from Harriet Tubman to Steve Jobs to Albert Einstein to Socrates. I didn't do that in historical order, but they really valued wonder and asking questions and dreaming and the imagination. They understood how important that liminal space, that phase of not knowing, of uncertainty, of still experimenting, of like following the breadcrumbs. They realized how important that was as part of the process to innovate, to get to a brilliant answer, etc. So asking questions is a really important mindset. And ultimately, if it's done in the context of work, it can be a really cool denoter of your culture, of your organizational culture.
Oh, yes. And I want to come back to that because I have heard you talk about instead of having a mission statement, we should have mission questions.
Well, that actually comes from Warren Berger, too. Warren Berger is where I learned that. I love that instead of having a mission statement, let's have a mission question. And the reason why that makes sense is missions actually should evolve a little bit. They should evolve because your market is evolving. Your products and services and experiences should evolve a bit. They shouldn't be the same, shouldn't look and feel the same way they looked 30 years ago or 10 years ago, right? So asking a mission question is a really great challenge and prompt from Warren Berger.
And it stimulates more thinking. Instead of declaring a statement is like, period, that's the end of it.
Yeah.
The question is like how will we model this, or how will we evolve, or, in what ways have we demonstrated our commitment to? Those are better ways. Action. It goes back to your model again.
Yes, and think about if your company has a mission question, it could be your team. Let's say your company doesn't want anything to do with this. We have a mission statement. Well, your team could have a mission question. And that keeps you on your toes. It's like to follow what you're saying. If the mission question is, how might we ensure that our medical products or that the food that we sell is meeting the needs of our customers? And needs could be physical needs, nutritional needs, social needs, whatever it is. That's a beautiful mission question because you're always checking yourself to make sure, is the way we're selling this makes sense? Is the way we're sourcing this makes sense? Is the way we are developing it still making sense? And if it's not, we can morph it. So it's a wonderful way to approach.
I love that. And especially in that spirit of innovation and creativity, sometimes we have these really big ideas, but if we're losing our mission in the process, like, yes, it's interesting and it's new and novel, but it's not going to enable us to further serve the whatever population that our product or service is intended to serve. But that mission question can bring us back to center.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So how do you recommend when you're on a team and you are now that you're hearing this thought leadership around divergent, convergent questions, and you're starting to pay attention to, my goodness, Natalie is right. Like we are asking ourselves so many convergent questions. What can we do? How could we be a catalyst for change?
Well, one thing to do is everything becomes easier through practice. And that's kind of and I know we'll get to this in later part of our conversation, but it's part of the way I think about wonder and rigor. We actually do need rigor. We need practice. We need skill mastery. So one way to practice and be a catalyst of change to develop more curiosity, one way to practice getting better at asking questions ourselves, among our teams, but let's say we're talking about team, but you can do this solo as well. Instead of brainstorming, I like to take people through question storming. So we could still have a prompt. Let's go back to this ordinary pen. Maybe we're a pen company and we're trying to innovate a pen, right? Which actually would make sense for pen companies, seeing how, voice recognition is becoming so popular and people don't seem to write with pens anymore, not in the way we used to. Anyway, we could it could be 90 seconds. It could be 15 minutes, but really I find that in short bursts of time, kind of in sprints, we can generate lots of questions, and we can have these guidelines of maybe the first sprint is asking these big blue sky divergent questions. And then maybe you pair off and share. These are the questions I came up with. And then you might do mashups of the questions. What begins to happen is that you get much more excited about these questions. It's not so much about the answer immediately. Eventually it can be, but it's about what these questions inspire, what these questions lead to in terms of maybe different strategic partners we should be seeking out, maybe different work processes, maybe a different context in where and how we do our work. So question storming is an exercise that can really catalyze a ton of shifts in behavior and begin to normalize curiosity.
Yeah, you talk about that in Creativity Leap, where you talk about the subtitle of Creativity Leap is great, which is Unleash Curiosity, Improvisation, and Intuition at Work, right? These things that we did so naturally as children.
Yeah.
Now, how do we do this as adults at work?
It's practicing that muscle. And the more you practice it, the easier it will get. And probably the way to practice it is not in the office initially. The way to practice it initially is to what I call be a clumsy student of something, of anything in your life. It could be learning chess, or I want to learn French this year, so I need to sign up at Alliance Française in downtown Philadelphia. I've been a student of ballroom dance for the last 4 years. When you learn something new, you're really bad at it. You're not the smartest person in the room. You feel awkward. You feel self-conscious. And through baby steps, through faltering baby steps, you learn to ask a question because you just don't understand this. You do a redo over and over again. You are open to being much more experimental until you get the way it works in your brain. You observe people who are much better at it than you are and how they seem to do it. You learn from your peers. You learn from teachers. You begin, especially in pursuits like gardening, probably auto mechanics, even though I've never tried learning auto mechanics, or coding, or whatever your jam is, your intuition gets a little bit more attuned. You learn to follow your gut. What's happening is that you are catalyzing different neural synapses in the brain, so that when you go back to the work at hand, you all of a sudden are not as shy about asking a question, because you realize that when you asked a question before in that ballroom, Roomba, or cha-cha, or waltz class, the world did not come to a screeching halt because you didn't know the answer. You realize that being experimental is a little fun. You realize that following your gut and your intuition is like exercising a muscle. The intuition is like a sonar or a muscle. And the more we exercise it and listen to it and pay attention, the louder, clearer, stronger it gets. The more we ignore it, the flabbier and dimmer it gets. So I experienced this probably a year into, not even a year, probably 6 months into studying ballroom. I remember being on a call with a new client, and they were throwing out all these acronyms, and I had no idea what they were talking about. I thought, gosh, I probably should know what they're talking about. I don't know what they're saying. And so I just asked politely, I said, I'm sorry, what does the ABC of XYZ mean? So they kind of paused, and they actually said, wait, you know what? Wait, what does that mean again? They had been throwing around acronyms they forgot, right? And, again, the world did not come to a screeching halt. We had a bit of a giggle, and they explained, and it actually clarified maybe some things that needed to shift. So become a clumsy student of something in your personal life, and it will really help you to shift the way you work with others as well.
So true. And I think it humbles you too, back again to your model about the humility of we're not going to be great at everything. And it reminds us that sometimes when we're teaching others, they're the clumsy student and we're the teacher, professor, or the expert. So how can we be kind and thoughtful and generous to how we're making this accessible for them so that they could be willing to play around and practice with us? And I've also heard you mention question shaming before. So I would love to, you're kind of talking about it, but just could you talk specifically about the shame that sometimes we carry with us?
Yeah. So when we wonder why don't we ask more questions, what's that about? Part of it is just the way we've been educated, right? People who have succeeded in very traditional work environments might be a little A-type. Probably were rewarded for certainty, for having the answer, for being able to fill in the dots and being able to, get to an answer quickly. The reality is that once we get into these work environments, it's quite murky. There's a lot of gray. There's a lot of VUCA environments that are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So one reason why we don't ask a lot of questions is that's not how we've been educated, right? We haven't been educated, most of us, to follow the process. We've been educated and rewarded and incentivized to have the one correct answer, when actually there might be multiple possible future scenarios. The other reason why, in my experience, I observe we don't ask a lot of questions because we've been question shamed at some point in our learning experiences, educationally, and or on the job, where we dared to raise our hand, ask a question, and you were met with either silence or giggles, and that feels horrible. So you get the message really quickly, okay, we don't ask a lot of questions around here, so I'm not going to stick my neck out again, right? And one of the best ways leaders and managers who may be listening to this can encourage people to ask questions is for them to model it. What not to do is to say, okay, guys, I encourage you to ask me anything. I love your questions. People are still a little mistrustful. So the way to get people you're managing, leading, to ask more questions is for you to demonstrate your own self-inquiry, the way you begin to question a process, maybe, and to model that behavior.
Oh my gosh, so true. So you have been quoted as saying, your quote is, creativity is our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems, produce novel value, and generate meaning. So there's a lot in there. So why don't we start with the beginning, which is this toggling between wonder and rigor. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that creativity is not doing whatever you feel like. Creativity is not the domain of only a talented few artists and designers who, have this one-way connection to some kind of inspirational current. Creativity requires you to tap into wonder, which is about audacity and deep curiosity and using the imagination and dreaming and daydreaming and pretending. And it also requires rigor, and rigor is focus and practice and time on task and skill mastery. And the reason we know this to be true is because let's just say you have been only associating creativity with great art and artists. Let's just say that, which is true. Artists are incredibly masterful at wrestling with the ambiguity of the creative process. They're not afraid to say, I don't know. I don't know what's going to come at the end of this process. They design space and time in their days, their lives, and their work for the wonder, for the curiosity and the dreaming and the pretending. But they also devote and dedicate a lot of time, years, to hone their skill, practice. They have technique. They have skill mastery. Anyone who has really reached a certain proficiency in athletics, same thing. Before you can do the magic with the soccer ball on the field, or in track, or in football, or in lacrosse, or tennis, whatever it is, you spent years mastering technique and repetition over and over and over again. So you make it look so fluid and effortless, and you're in flow, right? So that's what I mean by creativity, is our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And then the piece about novel value and meaning is just that I really want people to understand that creativity is not woo-woo. Creativity is the engine for innovation. And if we commit to building a creative capacity, we actually will be able to innovate more consistently and sustainably as individuals and as organizations. So that's the value, the novel value that we can produce. And then meaning, right? We all want to have a sense of meaning and purpose associated with the work that we do. And there's been some terrific research in 2023 that Thrive My Way produced, where they had great statistics about like 60% of CEOs said that creativity was going to be is a really important leadership skill, but less than half of the workers who responded to these surveys, like maybe 40%, really felt like they were given enough time during a given year to work on creative pursuits. So there's a big gap analysis between what we say is important and then the time we give people to develop that skill. So we need to spend more time with wonder, and we need to spend more time with rigor.
Thank you for that. That's just a great quote for us to take in and ask ourselves, how am I doing and how could I dedicate more time and energy to those things? And if I have a preference for one half of that or the other, how could I challenge myself to invest more intentional energy in that other part, right? Because isn't this like a two-sided coin or a yin yang?
It is. Yeah. You have to have that self-awareness, and you need, if you can't check yourself, hopefully that you can read the book and you can design processes to help to add in more wonder or more rigor. It's all situational.
For sure. Well, speaking of books, drum roll, we have a new book of yours coming out in 2025. I'm so excited. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Sneak peek.
Yes. This next book is a book that tentatively the title is Move, Think, Rest, a new way to work, create, and flourish. And the question I'm exploring in this book is, what if it turned out that our most productive selves are not when we're churning through email or on Zoom or at the whiteboard, but when we step away and we engage in movement and thought and rest. And I call this the motor framework, or MTR, Move, Think, Rest. And the reason this matters more than ever, this book is going to be a provocation on a new way to redesign work, to redesign our relationship with time. It matters now more than ever for three big reasons. Number one, ubiquitous technology. So much of the technology that we have around us today is going to give us the freedom to do more cognitive offloading, and we can amplify what makes us uniquely human in our work environment. So ubiquitous technology is one reason. The second reason is unprecedented burnout. We need to deal with the psychological and emotional turmoil that's happening for people because they feel like they're constantly on. And there's all this research that shows connections between well-being, employee engagement, and productivity, lower recidivism, which can be very expensive every time you have to rehire, et cetera. And then the third reason why this matters now more than ever is because of hybrid work and virtual work and people trying to figure out the new rules for hybrid work. So I have all these ideas that I'm putting into this book as I interview a range of people from different sectors and backgrounds, but really to help us redesign work and our relationship with time through the lenses of movement, thought, and rest.
Oh, I cannot wait. Thank you for doing that. I know these things are a labor of love. There's not an easy process that you're in the midst of. So we're cheering for you because we need this book. We need this book. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to recap what I've heard you say, some of the highlights of what I've heard, so that our listeners can consider how they could apply some of this to their own work and lives. And even if they just take one nugget, that would be a win for both of us. Let's start with gratitude. This grounded in gratitude sense of being grateful for noticing the elements of the simple things, like the pen example is brilliant. Just to say to ourselves, what didn't I notice about this before? What's true? Who else was involved with this? And that centering us on how that connects us to other people. And then that next level of humility of asking ourselves bigger questions about what can I learn? How can I participate in this? What are some things I didn't notice before? and now allowing us to then get into curiosity where we're wondering and we're asking questions and we're noticing things that maybe we didn't notice before, which then leads us to empathy. And that gives us the opportunity to check in, like, why do people do the things that they do? And be curious about that as well, which would then lead us to action and thinking about, what actions might we take? What bigger questions might we ask? And then we talked about the different taxonomy of questions and the difference between divergent and convergent questions, and just noticing the ratio of time that we're spending in either of those places, and then even that hybrid type of a question. And then when you talk to us about that balance of wonder and rigor, where we're dreaming and asking those big questions, and we're also being disciplined and focused and working on being expert or really practiced on things. And then one of the big things that I heard you say, Natalie, is to be a clumsy student. Like, think of something in your life that you are curious about. Maybe you're a little bit afraid to try it, but you're willing to, take an adult ed class or take an online learning class or whatever, right? Just to challenge ourselves. And then when you led us to the whole purpose and meaning and how we want to think about our work and our lives in a way that really grounds us in something that's powerful and can last long beyond the time that we're here on this planet. So you've really given us a lot of great things to think about. And I know among my other listeners here where we're very excited about this new book to come out, because this move, think, rest is what we need as a counterbalance. This sounds like we're just running so far like a freight train and we're just tired. So how can we consider that downtime to be an opportunity for productivity as well?
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you. Absolutely.
Yeah. Wonderful. So for our listeners, I will put a bunch of resources in the show notes, including Natalie has this really cool resource called Wonder Rigor Discovery Deck. So if you're like, oh, I want to do this with my team, but I don't know what to do. 1, hire Natalie. 2, get this deck. And it's just like a self-discovery. You could just pull a card out and ask yourself these questions and really get the ball rolling. So thank you for modeling this way of being creative and helping us to take that leap.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for having me. This was an awesome conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to R.O.G, Return on Generosity podcast. Please help us grow by subscribing and reviewing us on your favorite podcast player. And for more information, visit bridgebetween.com. We grow when we give.
우리는 나누면서 성숙합니다.
We grow when we give.
On rayonne quand on donne.
We grow when we give.